Now, if you're more comfortable with your TA84 calculator as opposed to using StatCrunch, you are welcome to check your results for confidence intervals and hypothesis testing using your calculator. So just as we did in StatCrunch, there's really two options. I'm given the mean and the standard deviation, and I'm just going to enter those. So I'm going to go to Stat and then Tests. And for my first one, because it's a confidence interval, I'm going to go to 8, which is T interval. So I can just click 8. And notice this gives me data or stats. So data would be if I'm using my list. For this one, I'm going to do stats. And for stats, they're going to ask for some pieces of information. So X bar is my mean, which is my 57.8. S sub X is, of course, my standard deviation, which is 6.015. N, in this case, was 10 because there were 10 basketball scores. And for my confidence interval, I was doing a 90% confidence interval. And then I'll calculate. So just as I had before, I get a confidence interval of 54.313 to 61.287, which matches what I had previously. I can do the exact same thing, but instead of an interval, I can do a test using those statistics. So I'm going to go to Stat and then Tests, and instead of 8, I'm going to choose 2, which is T-test. And again, I'm using stats, and notice that because I just did this, they have the same 57.8 and 6.015 that I included previously. What I need to do is put in the mean, what I'm expecting, of course. So that was whatever my null hypothesis was, which is 55. And then I also need to choose down here the appropriate direction. So our alternative hypothesis was that the score was different than 55, so that's that not equal to. You can change the color if you've got one like mine, it doesn't really matter. And then I'm either going to calculate or draw, so I'm going to choose calculate here. Calculate gives me my test statistic of 1.472, which we've seen a million times before, my p-value of 0.1751 essentially, and if I can see here, if I would have chosen draw instead of calculate, it actually makes my little two-tailed test for me and then gives me those same values on that screen. So whichever way you want to go is completely up to you. Now, just as we did with StatCrunch, if you actually have the data, that's the better way to go. So if you go to Stat and Edit, as you can see, I have this basketball data in my L1. So I'm going to let the calculator do the work for me. So I'm going to go to Stat, Test, and 8, just as I did before. Stat, Test, 8. And in this case, I'm going to choose Data instead. And remember that data was in my list 1. And remember my confidence level was 0.9. And so then I'm going to calculate. And again, notice I get the same values. And then if I wanted to do the same for a hypothesis test using my data, I would go to Stat, Test, and 2. Choose Data instead of Stats. I'm still including my null hypothesis, which was 55. Notice now I'm just choosing the list where I'm telling my calculator to get my data. Frequency is 1. Not equal to is my alternative. And then this time I'm going to choose draw just for fun. And as we can see, it's drawing the same picture in blue instead of green, but it's the exact same values that we're looking for here. So the 0.1751, etc. So I would like for you, using your TA84, and if you haven't entered it into your calculator, you should press pause and enter those in, but I want you to just check the 95% interval and check the test that we did previously using the battery example. So try both of those and then press play to check your work. So again, notice that I've already entered that data into my L2, that is my battery data. And I'm going to check it with a 95% confidence interval and test the claim. I'm going to go to Stat and Tests and choose the T-test. So I'm going to check the test first. I'm going to input my data. My null hypothesis was the 300 because I'm expecting it to be unchanged. In this case, my list is L2 because that's where I have the data. So wherever your list is, choose that one. Again, frequency of 1. My alternative hypothesis was that it exceeded or was greater than 300, so make sure you choose that. and then you're going to calculate or draw, whichever one. So notice here on my example, I chose calculate, and notice I found the p-value of 0.2378. Here I went ahead and clicked draw because I wanted you to see what that picture would look like. This is the area that we're finding, is the area to the right of our test statistic. And then of course if I wanted to do the same but for the interval, then I'm going to go to stat, tests, and 8, which is our t-interval. I'm using data that's in L2, my frequency of 1, and my confidence level of 0.95. And then I'm going to calculate. And notice I get the t-interval 287.63, 324.87, and this was the same conclusion we had written before, so obviously this matches up.